Hello, everybody. This is Daniel with Driving and Dragons, sitting outside in the sunshine on an absolutely beautiful day here in central Alabama. If you guys hear some noise in the background, maybe a bird tweet or the caw of one of my own crows, that's right, Harmony. You're not the only one who has little black feathered friends hopping around their yard. And you might hear Mr. Lucas the Longshanks, my Beagle Greyhound All-American hound dog. He's All-American because he's related to all the hounds in America. So that might be some of the stuff you might hear in the background here as we sit outside and enjoy the day. This video is really just an off-the-cuff, unscripted, stream of consciousness type thing. And we're going to talk a little bit about GM-facing game design here. And this plays over into not just people who are trying to design their own game or who have a foot in that world, trying to make content and that sort of thing. It does actually play over into being a game master, utilizing the rules, and just an overall mentality of how to approach tabletop role-playing games to make better games. So we're going to touch on a couple of things there. First up, a couple of updates. The Dodge Dart, I am currently in the process of waiting on a transport truck to pick up the order to bring it down here. I've got a broker who is searching for a specific price point to get that vehicle down here. I've got a place set up for it, and I've already got a few things going on, and I do have to say this. I'm not going to say a name because I haven't asked yet, but I would like to send out a very special thanks to my very first patron. So we already have somebody signed up to funnel money into this project and hopefully help me give away a car sometime in the next year or so. But looking at this, I do want one other thing. I'm not going to include this in intelligence as a dump stat tomorrow, just because I spent a big chunk of last week picking on J. Scott Garibay, but I would be remiss if I didn't point this particular thing out. Has nothing to do with TTRPGs, but it does highlight something that always makes me, as a devout and very traditionalist Catholic, laugh at. We all make jokes about the internet atheist who basically gets all of his information from memes and is just flat out wrong 99% of the time when he says things. It's have you ever read the Bible? Well, you clearly haven't, because the only thing you know about the Bible is stuff that you read off of memes and bad quotations of Stephen Fry. But I think one of the funnier things, one of the ones that makes me laugh more, is the anti-Catholic hyper-Protestant. This is not a shot at my Protestant friends out there, but there is a sect of the Protestant believers in Christianity who, more than anything else, despise Catholicism. And they're kind of a funny group because it's a horseshoe. You miss 90% of the what we would call moderate Protestants. And it really comes from the hyper-evangelical, extremely conservative theologically, and then from the other side of the spectrum, the ultra-liberal wing of Protestantism, like the Rainbow Church crowd. But they share something in common with the good old internet atheist, in that they talk straight out of their ass and they get their information from the worst possible sources. That's where we get to old J. Scott Garibay. This nutcase literally gets on his thing. I'm going to give props to the Catholic Church. I'm ready to expose their racism. What? They've had multiple black popes? Yeah, multiple black popes going back into the Middle Ages, because the church, usually when you're electing a pope, it's about theological forces. It's different groups within the different schools of theological thought within the Catholic Church competing with each other, especially after the church moved away from the more hyper-political side of things in the early Middle Ages. But this fool gets on there and literally says the words, "I watched Conclave, so I know all about the Catholic Church and how popes are selected and all this stuff." That sums up the hyper-Protestant, anti-Catholic arguments in a nutshell. Just like the internet atheist, it's, I know all about Christianity because I saw this one clip of a lecture from Hitchens online one time, and I saw a whole bunch of memes on r/atheist. So I know all about Christianity. Well, I know all about Catholicism because I watched the Da Vinci Code and watched Conclave and a whole bunch of other anti-Catholic media that was made by non-Catholics and has almost no research. It's very, very surface level. So no, Garibay, you don't know a damn thing about Catholicism or the selection of the Pope or what goes into it or anything because your ass watched Conclave. Just like you don't really know that much about Dungeons and Dragons just because you're an obsessive fan of Critical Role. But anyway, that's enough Garibay nonsense. Moving forward, what I want to talk about here is something that I've mentioned before on the channel. What I see is a major problem in the TTRPG community, and it's not a social problem. This is not a Sparkle Troll versus Grognard problem. This is not a gamist versus narrativist versus simulationist problem. This is not a gaming philosophy problem in the sense of the way games interact with people and people groups and that sort of thing and what we should be doing with them. And it's not really a content argument. It's not about what's contained in these books on their surface and the way things are done. It's an overall ethos within the community where we have shifted over time from a focus on game masters away from that to a focus on players. And when I say players in this world, let's go ahead and define our terms. When I say player, in this case, I'm talking about the active players who play player characters, as opposed to the player who is a game master. That distinction in and of itself, while it's a great shorthand to kind of keep what I'm talking about on an even keel here, it's actually kind of damaging in and of itself. We separate players and game masters when we really shouldn't. There are some cases where they have to be separated. For instance, some of the meat and potatoes of what I'm about to get into is a place where they have to be separated from a design perspective. But from an ethos perspective, we all need to understand that every single person who sits at the table is a player, with the sole exception of if you are paying a game master. That is one of the great ironies here, is that the player focus, if you want that, if it is obsessive about the individual players at the table, you need to have a paid GM, because it will not function in the traditional sense with the free services of a game master, because the second he's not being paid, your game master becomes another player at the table and has to be treated as such. They can't be subjected to the low-level abuse of a player-focused game. But that distinction actually breeds some of this problem, even though it really should just be a shorthand to separate who we're talking about. Definitions aside, we have a player-focused mentality that has cropped up. And I think it's actually a little bit of an overcorrection. The early game, I believe, was a little too game master focused. And that's because it came from the designer perspective. You have to be game master focused when you're designing games, which is what we'll get into here in a second, and why we have to be that way in a second. But from a philosophical perspective amongst the community, you can't be too game master focused, because then you build a system where the players just kind of feel like they're jerked around. And once again, everybody at the table being a player, it gives the game master a superior position that he doesn't need. He needs a certain superior position to run the game, a certain level of authority and respect that's needed. But there are some places that he does not need to be treated as superior, which would be the feeling of fun at the table, that sort of thing. It's not about the game master's fun and the game master's rules. It's about everybody's fun and everybody coming together at the table. It's one of those situations where there's no need for laws if everybody is just a good person. We need laws, we need rules, and we need order, because not everybody is going to. There's some people out there who are going to do what's right because it's right. There's a lot of people who are only going to do what's right because if they don't, there's consequences. which is kind of where the early systems fall apart. If you have game masters who approach it with the correct ethos, with the correct mindset, and with the correct feelings and disposition towards their players, you don't have a problem. But if you have a game master who approaches it with any kind of antagonism or favoritism, you run across issues. That had to be adjusted out of the game. There had to be a swing towards the players having more defined rules, more defined mechanics, where they could point to a rule book and say, well, I get to do this and I can succeed in this because the rules of the system say I do. And rule zero is important. It is probably the most important thing about TTRPGs. Game master discretion is the key that makes these things work. But by giving the players a place where they can point out where it says mechanic XYZ says I can do this, it exposes game masters who make rule zero rulings at the table for the wrong reasons. In other words, if I say, no, you can't use the power attack feat in a 3.5 game here, I better have a very good logical reason that everybody at the table can accept before I take that ability away from the fighter who took the power attack feat. This is a check on the game master, because if I just arbitrarily take it away because I don't like it, everybody at the table knows it, and that exposes me as acting in bad faith. This only has to exist because there are game masters who would act in bad faith, which led to that classic grognard, grognard stereotype of the GM versus the player philosophy. The problem is we overcorrected, and we started making systems that were obsessive about not just player agency, but a player domination of a sense. I mean, I've always called it toxic player agency. The problem is the rules themselves have started being written to promote a situation where players have agency not just over the decisions and feelings and disposition of their character, but they have agency over everything that happens to and around their characters, which is a vast overcorrection where you've now stepped into the players being able to abuse the game master. This is if you're going to pick the lesser of the two evils, the game master being the one who can be abusive is far and away the lesser of the two evils, because it's one player who can be replaced. It's one player who can be corrected by the other human beings at the table. It's one player who can have a rule change or a slight adjustment in the system to curb that, as opposed to one player who is suffering it on 4, 5, 6 sides, depending on how many players are at the table. And you're having to find ways to compensate for minor infractions from 4, 5, or 6 people that leads to your classic, they call the game master burnout. Why do you think these 5e game masters suffer so much from burnout, whereas these 1e, 2e, and even 3e game masters don't suffer from game master burnout? It's because the 4e, 5e, 5.5e, 5e clone, modern TTRPG design ethos has put so much focus on the players being able to control everything that if a game master can get one player happy, he has 3 others to worry about. And it only takes one of them to disrupt the situation. I get 3 of my 4 players happy. Player 4's causing problems and it's pushing things, so I make some adjustments for player 4. Now I've got players 2 and 3 pissed off at me, so I have to make another adjustment, and now I get 2, 3, and 4 happy, and player 1 is causing issues. Next thing you know, I've got game master burnout because I'm constantly in a tug of war between my 3, 4, 5 players at my table. That leads me to what I'm talking about today, 14 minutes into this video. So I quote tweeted a post today, and because it was one that that really kind of spoke to me here. And that quote tweet was from Grand DM, And he said, reading many RPGs reminds me of my time in the military. Gear was often designed by people who never had to use it. And it's the same with games. You can tell when designers do not GM. The player to GM ratio has always been lopsided. If you want more people to buy and run your games, make them game master facing. That is the change the industry needs and the future of TTRPGs. Now, I think he's wrong in one place. There are way more players than there are game masters out there. So I think he's kind of fundamentally wrong there. But if that's what he's implying, but this is a point where the minority is more important than the majority. I quote tweeted it with the response, "It's a simple concept. Which is more likely to succeed? A game designed to facilitate one player customizing an experience specific to their table, or a game that somehow accounts for all the decisions and ideas of the other 3 to 5 players at each table." That is where the design philosophy comes in. It's kind of like public education. All right. Public education has a major problem, and that is federal money. Federal money is a problem. The Federal Department of Education in the United States is a problem. Why? Because if you have a school that is made up for my neighborhood, just my neighborhood, we know what we need to educate. Great outside resources are great and everything, but we know the important stuff that is best to educate our children. We know how they're going to respond the best. We know what programs are most important in our community. Maybe our neighborhood is blessed and we have no educationally disabled children, period. So we don't need money that is earmarked for special needs education because we don't have it. However, what we do have is a lot of children who have, say, strong athletic abilities. And we need to devote more of our resources to expanding on that so that they can have those opportunities that are brought from athletic scholarships and developing those things. Maybe we have a community that is blessed to have a lot of, our area has a lot of engineering and a lot of, aerospace type jobs. Maybe we need to focus more on that and more on that type of education because it's more prevalent in our area and it's more suited to the success of the children that are in our area. The point is, each one of these communities knows better where their short-sightedness is, where the falls are, where we need things shored up, and where we don't necessarily need as many resources. Going back to the sports thing, maybe our community has a very strong, not necessarily little league, but private sports, extracurricular sporting community. There's tons of baseball leagues and football leagues and stuff like that out there for our kids to go play in, and we don't need a lot of that at our school in order to give opportunities to our children. So the point being that the smaller scale you can get the control, the better it is overall. The same thing happens with our TTRPGs. Nobody knows what type of game. Hold on one second. We got people running by in the old Jeeps and motorcycles. Four-wheelers going by. So our game masters know better what our table needs in a game more than anybody else. It doesn't matter what company it is. Doesn't matter if it's a small indie publisher like Arcane Library. Doesn't matter if it's Wizards of the Coast. Doesn't matter if it's Troll Lord Games. Troll Lord Games does not know what my table needs in order for my players to have a better experience. Therefore, Troll Lord Games does not need to try and make a game that appeals to my players. They need to make a game that gives me, as the game master, the tools to make an enjoyable experience for my table and my friends. The design focus needs to be on the game master and giving the game master tools to provide a strong and varied experience that has the guardrails in place that teaches them how to make a game system that allows them to play, but also has the leeway and the variety and the variation necessary to make the game work for their specific table. This is why, when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons, I am and forever will be a 3.5 edition game master. Because to me, 3.5 is the perfect mix. It is super modular. You're going to make an absolute mess if you try to use every single variation, every single variant rule, every single alternative. However, if you go through as a game master and you comb through what's available in 3.5 and you pick out the specific variations, the correct rules, the right variants to make a game that is suited to your players, you will have a better gaming experience than you will with, say, first edition, which is far more scaled back and requires a lot more, is a lot more varied and has a lot more, it's a lot more realistic in the sense that there's great variation between character classes and races and that sort of thing, but it kind of makes for an unenjoyable playing experience a lot of the time, especially for people who don't want to make that kind of sacrifice or have that kind of verisimilitude in their gaming situation. Or a 5e situation where everything is focused on what the players can do, and anytime you take something away, it feels like you're targeting that player. So, to me, 3.5 gives you the tool chest to make the correct decisions for your table. And it kind of comes back. It's kind of funny because there's been a lot of back and forth among the Bro SR types and some others here like this last week, where they're fighting back and forth about long-term campaigns. You got Scudder for Mike going there, oh, the 6-session campaign, and why your games are all short and stuff, and it's because of it's the world focus versus the player focus. I'm sorry, but you're both wrong. The game should not be players focused, player character focused. The game should not be world focused, like the Bro SR tends to say, where the world is ahead of everything. The game should be narrative focused, and not narrative focused on like some novel that the game master wrote, but narrative focused on the story that's being told by everybody there. And it should be game master focused in the way he gives the environment for the players to create that narrative. If you talk to the Bro SR, they'll tell you that if you go 1-to-1 time, rules is written, first edition only, you'll have these super long campaigns. Some people will have super long campaigns with that. Just like there are some people who will have super long running 5th edition campaigns that are very, very super, Sparkle Troll focused. And there's some people out there who will have extremely long campaigns in the one-page RPG system that has almost no rules and is just people sitting around at the table basically stroking themselves off in their own little narrative story world. What makes long campaigns is games that are tailored to the style of play that you want at that table with those players. Be it 1-to-1 time, be it Bronstein, be it AD&D Dungeon Crawl, be it Super Sandbox Hex Crawl with 19 players, be it Super Sparkle Troll Story Hour, where we hang out and have barista time and hang out at the Elven coffee shop and talk about the racial animus of the game world, be it superhero fantasy where our players are virtually invincible and never lose, and encounters are designed to always be won by the player and to make them feel great. Whatever your table is, you need the tools to build your game and your campaign to suit it. And if you want proof positive here, I've run Cyberpunk campaigns that lasted years. I've run Cyberpunk Red campaigns that lasted years. I've run D&D 3.5 campaigns that have lasted years. I have had numerous campaigns that the sessions number in the 30, 40, 50 range that are played every other week, that are played every 3 weeks. I've had weekly games that went for 2 and 3 years, no problem. And I've done them in narrative styles. I have never been somebody who has been fond of the run 14 different characters. I'm not a 1-to-1 guy. I'm not super fond of it. I've played around with it. I've seen it. It bores me. But that's because that's not what's right for me, and it's not what's right for my table. even though I've played with it. And just like that, knowing what my players want and having the tools to do it is what has led to me having lengthy, fulfilling campaigns with players who stay at my table and don't want to leave. Players who decide that if there's a conflict that arises where this game that they're part of wants to play on the same night that my game is, they come to my game because they would rather be part of my campaign because I have been given the tools to make that and to adjust it to my table. This is where game design needs to focus. It is far easier to make a game that is designed as a toolbox for a million GMs than it is to make a game that somehow caters to the individual whims of 100 million players. That's just all there is to it. Or even 10 million players, because I doubt we have 100 million players. The simple fact of the matter is that you need to be if you're designing a TTRPG, you need to think of it as you are designing a Lego set or an erector set of some kind that is going to be handed over to somebody to build something specifically to appeal to the people that they play with at their table, because they know better than you ever will what works for them. If I walk into a group of Bro SR players and I try to run a narrative-focused stop-time game, they're going to get bored, they're going to get irritated. I'm going to have a 5 or 6 session campaign because that's not what they want to play. It's not how they want to play, and it's not the entertainment that they get from the game. If I go in and I run a hex crawl sandbox 1-to-1 time for a group of narrative players who are wanting to live out the books that they read in Appendix N, they're not going to be satisfied because I'm not giving them anything. I've got players that I sit at the table and I say, here's the room. And they're sitting there, I'm sorry, DM, can I roll something? Because we're not getting what you're picking up. Where are we supposed to go? What are we supposed to do? That happens from time to time because I give them too much sandbox freedom and it's not what they want. That's not the style of play they want. Likewise, you run across players where you lay out a situation and they're like, yeah, well, I'm going to turn around and go the opposite direction out of town. Why are you going to do that? Well, because I don't want to do that. I see that there's clearly trouble that way. I don't want to deal with trouble, so I'm going to go this way and try and find some tomb that I can raid that's far away from this political conflict that's coming up. I don't want to take part. The town can deal with their own bandit problem, because I'm pretty sure the bandits and the town don't have as much money as a tomb somewhere, and I don't want to waste my time making bandit savior money. You have to adjust for your table. And the way you do that is with a game master focused game. As a GM, you sit down and you say, this is what I'm running. This is the focus. This is the world. This is how I have it set up. Do you want to play in it? And the players either say yes or no. The same reason safety tools are a problem is the same reason why player-focused game design is going to be the death nail of the TTRPG hobby. Safety tools are not bad because you're trying to make things comfortable for the players at the table. Safety tools are bad is because they're player-focused instead of GM-focused. Instead of it being a negative charter of, these are the things that will not be tolerated at my table, these are the things that will not appear in my game, it is a collective group of, I can disrupt anything with my little list. Oh, and by the way, if I didn't have it on my little list, that's de facto permission for that game master to include it. Far easier to say, here's what's in the cake, do you like it? Than it is to try and get a list of everything everybody's allergic to and then make a cake that fits. It's the same thing with your game design. Your game design needs to be, here you go, game master. Here's all the tools in the world for you to build something specific for your table. Here's the stuff that you can give to your players. Here's the outline for how they can craft their specific character. You can include these things or not include those things. If you're going to run this style of game, you might want to include doing this. If you want to be more brutal and more realistic, you might want to include this. But at the end of the day, it is designed for you as the game master to have all of these things to run the game with, and it is designed for the player to have these controls. That's what I've got for right now. Like I said, this is totally just a half hour of stream of consciousness monologue. There's no script here. And I do apologize if there's some repetitive rambling that's included in this video. But I want to know what you guys think about it. Let me know in the comment section below. This is a conversation that's worth having that needs to go forward. How do you make a game more game master focused for the benefit of all the players, in this case using players to mean everybody at the table, versus player focused, where you end up with GM burnout, short campaigns, and just a game that is, with 4 people having different goals at the table, falls apart because they're always in some kind of minor conflict, and you have one person in the middle trying to make these conflicting goals all come together. So that's it for right now. Like, share, subscribe, guys. Sign up for the Patreon. Let's go ahead and get this car built. I'm really looking forward to it, and I'll see you guys next time.